Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Hi, I'm Robyn. I moved into the area in about March of 2022 and began attending here a few months after that. Before COVID, we now often talk in terms of before and after COVID, don't we? Before COVID, I lived in China for a while. And while I was there, I was doing my best to be the hands and feet of Jesus, as were a lot of other good people. And when I first got there, I had the opportunity to teach swimming. A physiotherapist from the UK was wanting someone to help her, so we began to teach swimming to toddlers, or we're not always sure of their ages, but children who were special needs and orphans, aged between 2 and maybe 5. And we needed a volunteer for each child, and this was really hard work to set up. It was not easy because the local people had no concept of what we were trying to do, and certainly not of swimming. And so we had so many incredible experiences, but the project grew. And as we began to teach and include more volunteers, I'd add more classes. So I began to teach the children of the expats who were there, the kids who were missing out on swimming lessons from their own country. And then that grew to include the locals. And it grew to include young adult special needs or orphans. And we did all this, of course, as volunteers. We expected nothing in return. We just did it for why? Because that's just what we do as an expression of God's love. So word got out, and people were talking about it. Actually, it did create a problem because the locals did not have a concept of giving time, effort and energy for expecting nothing in return. In fact, it was such a problem that it drew the attention of the police, and I was pulled in for questioning because they did not believe that anyone would do something for nothing. So one day, I was walking through the Xiaochu, the estate where I lived, and don't think, a small group of units like we have around here at Wembley. Think a dozen or more multi-storey apartment buildings. I was walking through there towards my apartment, and a lady I didn't know came up and approached me. Her English was limited, and she said, You Australia? I said, yes. She said, you teach swimming? I said, yes. She said, you teach orphans? She didn't use that word. She didn't know that word. I don't know I can't remember what she said, but that's what she meant. She said, you teach for free? I said, that's right. And she said, what love is this? What love is this? So I just want to say that as we take communion, we're thinking about Christ, and we're thinking about his example, his ultimate example. What love is this?
Good morning. My name's Kathleen. I think I know most people here, but if I haven't met you, welcome to Westcity. And we're doing a fantastic theme at the moment. I think everybody's excited about this theme because this is an opportunity to look at individual stories where Jesus has an encounter with various women throughout the Gospels. And I'm personally excited by that theme because I am a woman. And so that makes my ears always prick up when there's women in the text, because I want to know what role women are given, what status women are given, and how Jesus in particular treats women when he encounters them. And my story today, I think, is it going to come up? Yeah, it's a man, a woman, and a well. Josh doesn't remember, but I messaged him going, pretty please can I have this particular story, because I've got so much to talk about with this one. So I'm super excited because this is a story that we've heard a lot. Put your hand up if you've ever read this story, heard this story, done a Bible study, heard a sermon about it. Okay, lots of hands. This is a favourite. This one comes up again and again. And when you listen to the Gospels, if you spend much time in the Gospels, there's a particular storyline that comes up over and over and over until your ears start to tune in, and it's almost like a tune that you know the tune of it, and the lyrics change with each story, but the tune stays the same. So again and again you get these encounters where Jesus usually goes from village to village with a whole crowd following him, and he encounters individuals who are broken and outcast, and they're outsiders, and there's something holding them back from their community. And again, Jesus passionately and compassionately and beautifully meets them in their point of need. And so you've got stories where he gives sight to the blind, he heals the sick, he helps the lame man to walk, he touches the untouchable, he loves the unlovable, he restores the outsider into their community. So when we come to this story where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman, our ears are already tuned in to that particular tune, and we go, oh, okay, the lyrics are going to fit with that. And sure enough, there's all these ways in which she is the classic outsider. To start with, she's a Samaritan, and we know that the Jews despised the Samaritan in that first century context. Lots of bad blood between them. So already you're expecting that she is the outsider in the story. Secondly, she's a woman, and we also know from cultural context that women were low status across the board in the Greco-Roman culture of the time. And then thirdly, there's a clue in the story. She comes to the well in the middle of the day. And so I've heard this story talked about so many times, and again we take that detail and we say, oh, that's not the usual time that the women went to the well. Normally the women go in the morning or in the evening. It's a hot country. Who would go to the well by themselves in the middle of the day? It's a clear sign that she has completely been rejected by her community and is the outsider. And then in the centre of the story we find out why. And there's this very uncomfortable bit where we discover that this woman has had a complicated love life, that she has had 5 husbands, and the man she's with now isn't even doing her the dignity of marrying her. And I've heard this presented as in, oh, she's a sinful woman, she's immoral, she's the town prostitute. But I think we can throw that to the side instantly, because women didn't have the right to divorce men back then. They could not initiate divorce. So there's no possible way that the shame is on the woman. The shame is on the men who have treated her poorly. Or, at best, maybe she's just had a run of extremely bad luck and they've all died one after the other. And even then, it appears that her community is seeing her as the object of shame instead of the object of compassion. But the problem is, if we approach this story with that melody in mind, the lyrics don't seem to fit with the melody. I've always been a bit uncomfortable with this story. It has always felt wrong, And it's only recently that I've heard some podcasts and read some stuff that's made me think, we've been reading this story completely wrong all my life. And it's actually telling a completely different story. The melody line is a different song than that outsider narrative. And don't get me wrong, I love the outsider song. I love it when I recognise it, when I see it. But this is not that story. And there's a few reasons I can tell it doesn't quite fit. The first one is, if she's an outsider, if she's a broken, low woman, an object of shame and scorn, she doesn't seem to know it. Because she's bold and sassy. When Jesus talks to her, she's like, who are you? What are you doing talking to me? Where do you come from? Everything he says, she's got an answer for. She goes straight in. It's actually the longest dialogue between any two people in all of the Gospels. And it's a complicated dialogue with massively deep and profound theological topics. And it seems a bit all over the place, but there is a thread in there if you're paying attention to the details. And if she's an outcast, her community don't seem to know about it. Because when she rushes back to the village, everyone, the whole community, listen to her testimony and are willing to accept this weird stranger who's just walked into town based on her words. They even come back to her a couple of days later saying, at first we were willing to believe in him because of your testimony, but now we see for ourselves that he's the saviour of the world. So if she's an outsider, that just doesn't fit. And the other massive problem I have with that reading of the story is, if this woman is an outsider, what is her deep need? How does this resemble, for instance, the story of Zacchaeus, where Jesus comes and absolutely pinpoints his need as an outsider to be put back into his community? What's her need? Is her need to be slapped around the face with, you've had 5 husbands and the man you're with now won't even marry you? She doesn't need reminding of that. So there's something really brutal about the way Jesus is talking with her. Something arrogant, something sexist, and there's even something quite racist in the conversation, because if you follow it, there's a lot of, you Samaritans and we Jews, and you Samaritans don't even know what it is that you're worshipping, but we Jews, salvation is coming from the Jews. And it doesn't land well. I'm really uncomfortable with that reading. So I'm really excited to get you guys to listen to the story fresh, to try and put that outsider melody away and recognise that maybe we've been listening to this wrong. So I'm going to get Dave to read the text for us, and you're going to follow. We'll have it up on the screen. And while you're listening, 2 things I want you to do. First of all, I want you to listen carefully to the storyline. So listen for the characters, the setting, and the action sequence. And also listen out for the weird details, the oddly specific details that don't seem to be important to the narrative.
Okay, is that working? John 4, woman at the well. Now Jesus had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Saviour of the world."
Then let's have a little look at that storyline and see what's actually happening. So in the storyline, it started off with a very strange phrase. It said Jesus had to go to Samaria, which was quite a long way out of his way. And it doesn't actually make sense that he had to go there. He was travelling between Judea and Galilee. Samaria is kind of in the middle, but most self-respecting Jews would go out of their way to avoid it if they could. So there's something significant in this bit where he had to go there. And then he comes to a well. And we get the detail that it's the middle of the day. It's noon. So the sun is high in the sky. And then along comes a woman. And they have a conversation about water. Here, I'll use a blue pen for water. It's a long conversation about water, lots and lots of water. And it turns out it doesn't sound like he's talking about water anymore. He's talking some kind of supernatural, spiritual version of water. And after the conversation, she rushes back to her village, to her people. And they invite Jesus and his disciples in. And the two communities become one. Okay, this is meant to be ringing a bell, guys. You've heard this story before. You've heard this story. If you know your Torah, if you've read the first 5 books of the Bible, as the people in Jesus' day knew them word perfect, backwards and forwards, they've heard this story before, again and again. Is this ringing any bells for you? Have you heard this exact same storyline anyway? Does anybody think of any characters that they associate with this storyline? Rachel. Oh, Esther's on the money. Now remember, there was an important detail. Which well did he come to? It wasn't just any well. It said it in the text. He came to Jacob's well, okay? So here you've got Jacob's well. And if we look back at the story of Jacob, Jacob had to travel a long way because his brother was going to kill him. And he came to a well. And it was the middle of the day and the sun was at its height. And a woman came towards him. Her name was Rachel. And in a supernatural, super powerful act, he just lifts off this heavy stone off the well, which normal human beings couldn't do by themselves. And he offered water to all her flocks, so a huge amount of water. And then she rushes back to her father's house. And Jacob is welcomed into the house and he marries Rachel and the two households become one. And it turns out this is a thing because Jacob's parents also got together in the same way. Abraham sent his servant a long way away and he came to a well and a woman came towards him. Her name was Rebecca. And this time Rebecca did the supernatural, superhuman strength thing because she gathered enough water to water not just him but all his camels, and camels drink a lot, so that in itself was a bit of a miracle. And then she rushes back to her father's tent and she ends up marrying Isaac and the two households become one. And if that's not enough for you, the great prophet himself, Moses, has to leave Egypt because otherwise his life's in danger, and he comes to a well. And a woman comes towards her, actually 7 women, because the tune is the same, but the lyrics are slightly different. And again, he offers quite, the superhero act is he fights off the local shepherds, and that way he can water all their flocks. They go back to the father's tent. He's welcomed in and embraced, and the two households become one. So this story is meant to be ringing bells for you. Wedding bells. This story is a wedding. This whole thing, when you hear the music in your head, it's meant to go like this. Dun, 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 dun. You are not listening to the outsider tune here. You are listening to a wedding song. Now, some of you might be a bit confused. I didn't know that Jesus married the Samaritan woman. And if he did, why did he choose a woman who'd had 6 husbands before him? What's going on here? And this is where, if we really want to make sense of this story, we have to pay attention to the lyrics. We have to pay attention to the weird, random, oddly specific details that don't seem to be really that important to the storyline. And in our Western way of storytelling, we add details everywhere to our stories. We love fleshing them out with lots and lots of details just to set the scene. In the Bible, if there's a weird detail, it means something. It's meant to trigger memories for you. So have a look at these opening lines of the story, and I've highlighted certain words and I've put them in blue with a line underneath so that it reminds you of hyperlinks, because these words are meant to be hyperlinks for you. You're meant to click on them in your mind and go, oh, there's a whole Wikipedia page that goes with that. Oh my goodness, yes, of course, this story's starting to make sense to me. So look at these words. The first thing is Samaria. Where even is that? That's the general area. What do we know about the Samaritans? What does the Bible tell us about their origin story? How is that connected to this wedding story here? The second one is Sychar. I'm not quite sure. I think Sychar probably. Where is that? Does that word appear again in the Bible at all? Turns out no, not at all. This is the only mention. So what is that meant to trigger in our minds? Then there's a couple of characters, Jacob and Joseph. It's no accident that they're in there. In fact, Jacob's mentioned 3 times in this story. So it's like John, the author, is going, Jacob, 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 are you getting it yet? Are you listening? So we're definitely meant to pay attention to those characters. And finally, Jacob's well. Is that in the Bible? No. Even though there is a story about Jacob and a well, that well is hundreds of miles away from Sychar, so it's definitely not the same well. So what's going on with that? So let me start with Jacob's well, because that's interesting. Turns out Jacob's well still exists. It's a real place. You can visit it today. It's probably the same well that these guys were at. It's in Nablus in the West Bank. And if you go there, apparently you can let down a bucket and draw out the most beautiful, fresh, cold water, because that well is very deep and it's fed by an underground spring, and it would have been a very important well to the local people. And it's associated with Jacob, and that's not going to come out in your Bibles, and yet it is mentioned in your Bible, because in Jesus' day, as well as the written Bible, they had the oral traditions. They had stories that they shared, and the people would elaborate the stories, and these are the kind of stories you'd pass on to your children. And Jacob's well had a big lot of stories associated with it. It turns out that people would share these stories that Jacob had this superhuman, miraculous power where he could just summon up the water and it would spring up and it would flow upwards out of the well. Instead of having to put your bucket down, it would come to the top and fill and brim over. And not only that, the stories get weirder. The well would travel wherever Jacob went. So it would come with him and water his people. And not only that, but when Jacob died, the well didn't die with him. It was then passed on to the next generation. And when the 12 tribes of the Israelites travelled throughout the wilderness, the stories went that this well travelled with them. And Miriam was in charge of it. And Miriam had the power to bring water out of the well, and that's how they gave water to all of those people in the desert. Now, I don't think the people in Jesus' day actually believed these stories. I don't think that they thought there was a literal well, but they loved metaphors. They loved imagery. And the image of a well is always associated with the presence of God. It always takes us back to the garden, where there was dry land and God brought out a spring that bubbled up and created a garden and a space where God was. So Paul is really aware of this story. All of the people in Jesus' day probably knew this story. The woman at the well definitely knew this story, because she says to Jesus, "You don't have a bucket and the well is deep. Are you saying that you're greater than our father Jacob?" It's like, yes, actually, I am. And Paul even references it and says there was a rock that followed them around in the wilderness, and that rock was Jesus. So there's no accident that Jacob's well. It's not just a setting detail in the story. What about these two characters, Jacob and Joseph? They're given a lot of airtime in the book of Genesis, and there's a thread through both of their stories that's really worth commenting on. Because Jacob, he's the guy who was later named Israel. His 12 sons later became the 12 tribes of Israel, so he is literally the father of all the Israelites. But from before his birth, his story was about conflict between brothers. So even within their mother's stomach, the two twins were fighting so mightily that she had to go inquire of God what was going on. And right through their lives, this conflict and division between the brothers escalated to the point where they treated each other so badly that Jacob had to flee and go into exile for 21 years of his life. But there's this beautiful, in the middle of the messiest story, probably the most disgraceful story of a country's origins that's ever been written. In the middle of that messiness and that conflict between brothers, conflict between sisters, there's this moment where Jacob is coming towards Esau, his brother, who he has wronged greatly, and he's fearing for his life, but he goes ahead of his family and takes the risk that he's going to lose his life. And Esau sees him in the distance, and Esau runs towards him. And he falls on his neck, it says. He kisses him, and he weeps, and he embraces him, and the two brothers are reconciled. Only for a moment in time. Jacob's a bit of a douche. But that one moment is such a portrait of what the whole story is supposed to be about. And then Joseph is Jacob's son, and surprise, surprise, the same thread goes on from generation to generation. And so Joseph's brothers hate him and want to kill him. And there's a moment in the story where Jacob sends Joseph out to spy on his brothers, never a good thing, and they decide they're going to kill him. They throw him in a pit. And one brother, Judah, decides to go even further. He decides to sell him into slavery. And Joseph is carted off to Egypt, and they think to certain death, and so they think that's the end of Joseph. And later in the story, it might be my favourite story in the whole Bible. I really love this. There's this scene in the Joseph story where the 11 brothers are all there with Joseph, face to face, but they don't know that it's him. He's risen, he's now a ruler in Egypt. And he's toying with them. He's threatening to take their younger brother off them, to take revenge for the way they've treated him. They don't know it's him. And Judah, who's gone through some character development by now, steps forward and offers to lay down his life to save his younger brother. And Joseph can't hold it back anymore. He bursts into tears and throws his arms around his brothers and falls on their neck, weeping. And there's this most beautiful moment of reconciliation between brothers. So when you read Jacob and Joseph, I want you to hold those themes in your mind when we look at this story and what it's really saying. The theme of division of brothers, which is a major theme throughout the whole scriptures from the very first pages of Genesis, and a particularly major theme in Genesis. Every single generation has conflict between the brothers. But then these two moments, and there's not many moments like this in the Bible, two beautiful moments of reconciliation. Let's look at some more details. This place, Sychar, it's not mentioned at all in the Bible anywhere, but Sychar, the New Testament's written in Greek. Sychar is a Greek word. In Hebrew, it's called Shechem. Does the penny drop now? Do you guys go, God, Shechem? Oh my goodness, that changes the whole story. It's really important, guys, because Shechem is the site. It is the scene of the crime. Shechem is the place where Jacob sent Joseph to spy on his brothers. This is coming full circle. Shechem is also the place of the division of the 12 tribes. So Chin preached about this a few weeks ago. We've gone through the story of the Bible. It's a key moment in the story is when the 12 tribes divided into two, and you had the northern kingdom that included Joseph's tribes, and to the south you had the southern kingdom called Judah, which obviously had Judah's tribe in it. Joseph and Judah separated again. And that happened at Shechem. So Shechem is strongly associated with division and with other stories of violence and nasty things. Don't even have time for it. But it's also associated with covenant and unity of the people, because Shechem is the first place that Abraham was brought by God when he entered the promised land. And God made a promise to Abraham, your descendants are going to live in this spot, in this land. And Abraham built an altar and worshipped God there. Jacob lived at Shechem, and there was a point where Jacob went, okay, we need to turn around the way that we're living, and he took all the household idols they were worshipping at the time, the Mesopotamian idols, and he buried them under a tree at Shechem, and he set up an altar and worshipped God. Joshua, at the end of that whole trip where the 12 tribes of Israel were going through the desert, Joshua led them into the promised land and took them to Shechem. And there are two mountains on either side, the mountain of blessing and the mountain of curse. And half the people stood on one side and half on the other. And they reinforced the covenant of God being with his people. And they set up an altar there for worship. And Joshua actually came back twice. He did that at the end of his life as well. And Joseph, remember how Joseph was sent into slavery in Egypt? When they returned to the promised land, they brought Joseph's bones with them and they buried them in Shechem, in that plot of ground that Jacob had bought for his son Joseph. The tomb is there today, and history repeats itself, doesn't it? Because that tomb is the site of a lot of conflict between brothers, of Jews versus Palestinian Muslims, and a lot of conflict often happens around the burial place of Joseph. Whew, all these themes. It's almost as if like the Bible, the writers of the Bible were really deliberate in their literary techniques of making sure that when you listen to the stories, you hear the melody, you see the links in the lyrics. And this is not a style of writing we're used to, so we actually need I needed a lot of scholarship to kind of find all these links. I couldn't have worked them out on my own. So let's come to the last one, Samaria. Who are the Samaritans? Have you heard of the Samaritans before? The Good Samaritan, all of that. Do you know where they come from? In the Bible, we've got these hints, and there's different stories. But remember those 12 tribes, how they got split into the north and the south? Assyria, this is a history lesson, so I love it. Assyria, the first global superpower, swept through the northern kingdom and basically took everyone away. Well, not quite everyone, because Chronicles tells us there were a few people left, particularly the tribe of Joseph. The two tribes of Joseph. So there's an interesting detail for you. Kings tells the story different to Chronicles. And in the book of Kings, the king of Assyria liked to repopulate the land with, because he collected people from all over the world and then just scattered them into new places. He put 5 different nations in that spot in Samaria, 5 different people groups, and each one of them came with their own god. And they called the gods Baals, and they worshipped the gods, and that was associated with fertility rituals and a lot of sex, a lot of violence, a lot of child sacrifice, all sorts of things that God found repugnant and that we should find repugnant today. And the people who were there, those leftover people from Joseph's tribes, did get caught up in that. They did intermarry and got caught up in those worship of those Baals. Oh, by the way, the word Baal can also be translated as husband. Is that an interesting detail as we listen to this story? Could that maybe change the focus of the narrative so that it's not just all about the shame of this woman? And then the story goes on, it gets weirder. Then these people were worshipping these 5 Baals, and there was an outbreak of lion attacks in the area. This is the book of Kings. And the king of Assyria went, we must have offended the local god, some deity by the name of Yahweh or something. Like, I demand that everybody in that area actually has to start worshipping this Yahweh guy. So the people returned to their worship of Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. And by Jesus' day, the Samaritans were a distinct group of people who believed passionately that they were the descendants of Joseph. And they still exist today. There's less than 1,000 of them, but these people are ethnically and religiously the Samaritans, and they don't believe in the whole Bible, they only believe in the first 5 books. And they still try and keep themselves to the religious practices as outlined in the Torah. And so we come to this scene where Jesus is in Shechem, this place that tells of the division and the reconciliation of brothers. And he's a descendant of Judah, standing there in front of a descendant of Joseph, and he's offering the living water of the well of Eden. And when he says to her, "Go and get your husband," and then he says, "You've had 5 husbands, 5 Baals that you've worshipped, and the one you're with now is not even your husband," as in you're in relationship with Yahweh God, but outside of the covenant. You've rejected the messianic branch from Judah. You've rejected the kingship of David and his line. You've rejected the temple in Jerusalem. You're outside of the covenant. This is a proposal. This is Jesus. This is a boy standing in front of a girl saying, "Will you marry me? Because I'm looking for believers who worship in spirit and in truth." And if you do the maths, he will be the 7th husband. And if you know the themes, if you hear the melody in the Bible, the number 7 is associated always with the day of rest, with new creation, with the completion of everything. And here is Jesus saying, the Jews don't get it. In fact, there's a detail in the story. This whole thing about the story happening in the middle of the day, that's not about her shame. That's not because nobody wanted to be with her. That's because the writer of John contrasts this story with John chapter 3, where Nicodemus met with Jesus in the middle of the night, skulking around in a house not in the open like this woman. She meets him in the middle of the day, in the middle of the field, where everyone can see her. Nicodemus, everything that Jesus says, he goes, "What are you talking about? I don't get it. What do you mean being born again?" When Jesus talks to this woman, she's intelligent. She knows her Torah. She understands all his references, and she engages with him and says, "I want some of that. Give me some of that living water. I'm here for that." Are you saying what I think you're saying? Could you be the Messiah that we're waiting for? And he says, "I who speak to you, I am he." And it's just a totally different read of the story now. It's not about her shame. This is a wedding, this is a marriage proposal. And this group of people, the Samaritans, have been waiting. They're ready. The harvest is ripe, and nobody had to sow it because they've been holding on to the word of God all these years. And Jesus knew it. That's why he had to come. He had to come to this place. And the theme of weddings in the Bible is right there from the very first pages, where God forms a human out of the dust, then puts him to sleep and breaks him into 2 halves, the 2 halves of humanity divided. And a man and a woman stand by a stream of living water. And the man cleaves to the woman, and the 2 become one flesh. And right there in that image is the whole story of the Bible. The reconciliation of humanity to each other and to their God. And then the Bible ends with Revelation 21, a glorious picture of the bride coming down, dressed in all her splendour. And the bride is the church. And we get to be part of this wedding story. Isn't that cool? Isn't it a different reading, different melody? And so I'm going to ask the helpers to come up and the musicians. And we get to have the bread and the wine together every Sunday when we get together. And I want you to think of it as a wedding feast. This is the wedding feast of the Lamb. You never have a wedding without great food. My son and my daughter-in-law are here. They got married earlier this year, and it was the greatest party of the year. The dancing, the fun, and the food, everything, because we were celebrating something really beautiful. When we come to the front, we get to celebrate being part of that wedding. So, this is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. And it is made ready for those who love God and for those who want to love him more. So come, you who have much faith and you who have little. You who have been here often and you who come for the first time. You who have tried to follow and you who have failed. Come, because it is the Lord who invites you, and it is God's will that those who want Christ should meet him here. Come.
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at West City, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.